The tooltip for it is basically telling us to build a lamp. For that, I open this cube's tweak menu and the trigger zone and give the object some glow, then wire the detect input to the glow output, detect output to the glow input. Now anytime something that is going to be detected, detect output gets high and activate the glow. By default, we are detecting possessed controller sensors. For example, every puppet has one inside of it. If I enter play mode and possess it, entering the trigger zone will result in a glow. We can also detect tags. You can see that now it's not the pup that is blinking, it is the tag. Blinking means this is going to be detected by a trigger zone that is currently looked at. By default, any unnamed tag will work to activate the detect output. There are also named tags, and moving those in the trigger zone won't do anything unless you tell the trigger zone to look for this specific name. You can name a tag by selecting the name and renaming it. Beyond that, you can detect the imp. In edit mode, this is a little bit hard to do because you have to get very close for the imp to actually enter the zone. In play mode, this is easier. You can see me enter it here, and every time I get there, the cube glows. We also have the camera. Entering with the camera of the player is going to activate the glow now. Also in play mode, the puppet does nothing but the camera. You can tell the trigger zone to trigger certain objects that are pulled from the Dreamweaverse. In this case, I prepared the chevron from Media Molecule. I just search for the name, select the right object, and then also stamp it in my scene. Moving it in the trigger zone now will trigger the detect output. I'm going to talk about labels a little bit later. For now, let's talk about scene elements. This is similar to the Dreamweaverse trigger, but you choose an object that is currently in your scene and wire it to the scene element input. Currently it's not gonna work because this object is unnamed. You can see this here, it's a sculpture. But removing the name will result in it triggering. This other object isn't going to trigger because it isn't wired, but you can also of course wire it as well, and both will individually trigger the zone. Beyond that, we have detection scope. This is a feature seemingly exclusive to tags. If I have multiple tags and move them inside the trigger zone, similar to the cone right now, they will trigger. If I now group the trigger zone itself with one of the tags, of course both will work. This is hard to do. I have to move the gizmo here up to the tag that is in its own group. But I can tell it to only detect a tag that is in its own group, not anything that is outside of that group, or the inverse of that, only tags that are outside of its own group. Supposedly this also works with tags and trigger zones being inside of a chip or outside of a chip instead of a group, but I couldn't reproduce that, so no example here. You can also use a required number. If I have this tag and put a single one, you can see the number here rise to 1. Putting a second one in will apparently not go to 2 for now, but I can up the required number and putting 1 in and then a second. He counted up to 2, and only when the second entered, the detect output actually went high. Moving 1 out again shuts off the lamp. Even though the detect goes up 1 step, you need the required number. You can also choose all, and now all objects of this specific kind have to be inside the trigger zone. 1 isn't enough, 2 is only enough if there are 2 at most, but if I create a third, the third has to be in the zone as well for this to be triggered. Let's put this at 1 again. On this tab, finally, there is the consider player option. I have no experience with that, and so I cannot talk about it at all. I'm sorry about that. On the second tab, we have the size of the zone and the shape. By default, it's a sphere. You can choose a cube, cylinder, cone, or an ellipsoid. Or the entire scene without any boundaries. Everything in the scene is going to be found. You can also use the slider to change the size and not grab it with your imp, or reset it to its normal size. You can also add a fall-off zone that is used to not give a hard edge to the output. Before, the light went either on or off. Now, if I enter the tag, you can see the light slowly ramp up. Check over the right here, the glow effect moves between 0 and the maximum value. Without the fall off, it is a hard edge. And finally, the labels page. This works with the detect label option. Any object can have a label, and an object that doesn't carry a label is considered unlabeled. Currently, the trigger zone is looking for unlabeled objects. For example, this here doesn't have a label, so it is blinking and can be found. Giving it a label removes it from the current list of objects that can trigger, unless I am looking for the target label that it currently has. So now this works. Objects can carry several labels, for example, missile and target at the same time. Looking for either of those two will work, unless you tell the trigger zone to search for all required labels. So if I'm looking for missile and target on the any label setting, any object that is either target or missile or both will work. But if I select all labels required, only those objects will work that have both missile and target at the same time. Beyond that, you can also limit visible and collidable objects. So if I am looking for all unlabeled objects, this one is going to trigger unless I make it invisible. This is not going to work because I am looking for only visible objects. If I'm looking for invisible objects, this one will actually work, while this one, which is visible, won't work. The same is possible for collidable. A collidable object, like this one, will trigger, but this one, which isn't collidable, won't trigger anymore. You can also make a very generous trigger zone that really doesn't care. So this one will work, this one will work. Beyond that, there is also the option to limit, again with objects and labels, to certain names. For example, this object up here has the name S1, and only this one will work because I'm looking for this specific name as I reset it. And finally, something about grouping objects. If I reset this, currently we are looking for unlabeled objects, but what if I look for target labels? These two objects don't have the target value, they are not blinking. If I group them together, they still don't have the target label, but I can open the tweak menu for the entire group, which is an entire object on its own, and give this group the label target. Now, either part of this entire group can enter, and the group will actually trigger the trigger zone, not the object itself. I think this is everything. If I recall something later on, I will probably make another video.